Okay, welcome again to another session looking at the Fischer Spassky match in 1972. We're looking at game 4 this evening. So Fischer playing white against Spassky in game 4, and he kicked off with e4. Spassky replied with the Sicilian defense, and knowing, full well what line Fischer usually plays against the Sicilian, what was to become, later known as the Fischer-Sozin line against the Sicilian. We see knight f3, d6, so an open Sicilian, knight f6, knight c3, and here Spassky plays the classical Sicilian knight c6, just developing both knights quickly, and Fischer plays bishop c4. So this is quite a dangerous bishop on this diagonal. Usually it's blunted immediately with e6, so we have this Scheveningen formation in the center, which is very flexible and has to be observed at all times. Black can often liberate with either d5 or e5 or both at some point, and that often wins games for black. It's a very flexible pawn center. The bishop retreats here, which is actually not the most common move in life, but actually bishop e3. The bishop retreating is the second most popular move. We have bishop e7, and now bishop e3. And black here, not fearing white's potential attacking intentions, actually just castles here. He doesn't wait, he just castles. And white here, if he wanted like an English attack, you'd think something like this and this. Actually f3 here is quite rare in this particular position because of this bishop movement. It's actually quite a rare position to play f3, it seems. That sort of construction. No, white usually does what Fischer does here, just castles. Black played a6. And the idea is often with a6 to continue with, at some point, well, maybe taking or moving the knight, and then b5, bishop b7, putting pressure on that e4 pawn later. So that's like the usual idea of this a6. We see f4, and the usual idea is to break open this bishop on this diagonal. So this bishop's a really important piece quite often. And here, yeah, black wants to play b5 and bishop b7, put pressure on the center, but c6 would drop if he plays b5 immediately. So he takes actually on d4, bishop takes d4, and now b5. It's very, very logical play by both sides. Black, wants to sort of improve his queen's bishop, and this bishop wants to kind of improve its prospects with maybe later f5 or e5 might be also an interesting possibility. Here now, yes, we're at a critical, theoretical juncture of the position. It seems the most common move is actually to play e5 here. There's 155 games in Livebook with e5. As an example, let's just follow this through on Livebook and go like this, then knight e4, knight d6. There's a lot of games here. There's over 100 games here that have gone like this. Wrestling mate. And there's even 26 games from here. So this became like a platform for theoretical debate, this opening. This e5 move, it's a theoretically interesting move to consider here, a forcing move. Fischer's move, a bit rarer. He actually played a3, 19 games in Livebook, just trying to discourage b4 undermining e4, trying to keep things perhaps more solid in the center. The e4 pawn is a potential vulnerability here, and black's play is totally logical. Bishop b7, it seems, putting pressure on e4. So how to defend the e4 pawn? Well, the most common actually is what was played, queen d3. You might think also queen f3. Well, it's going into a pin potentially. It has been played before. Queen e2 is another way, but queen d3 was chosen. Let's put on the kibitzer actually here as well. So add a kibitzer for its 13 tonight. Okay, so queen d3 protecting the e4 pawn, and again b4 a3 has been played as well. So a lot of this game so far, just getting the pieces out. The rooks are finally connected, and white has either f5 or e5 is looking quite interesting. But now things really do sharpen up, and this becomes actually the most common move here. Black actually plays a very interesting move in this position, exploiting in some ways the queen and rook position here, potential skewer line for a bishop from a6. Black plays a very, very interesting move. Actually, can you guess? Shall we see who's awake? Don't look at the score sheet tab if you're on Play Chess. Can you go to the training tab? That won't give any clues if we sort of have these guess the move things. For those that haven't seen it on YouTube, so you know, black's play here, I thought it was quite an aggressive move. What would you play here with black? It's based on maybe trying to decentralize white a bit. It's certainly, I don't think it's not an immediate like engine choice. In fact, it's a move which guarantees black an aggressive game. Yeah, it's a very interesting move, and in Lightbook it's given actually as one of the main moves, and the evaluation seems to be, the verdict at the moment seems to be equal. So can you see what it is? It's an interesting move for black here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, if you go to the training tab on Play Chess, yes, just to avoid I'll try and question variations more than the main game. All right, I'm gonna tell you. Yes, it was an interesting move. It was a5. So immediately we see actually, if queen takes b5, surely black must be okay with bishop a6. One would think. Actually, the engine gives us still as slightly okay for white, even losing the exchange. There's some prospects here. Black is under pressure here, but it should be okay for black with good play. This sort of position is winning the exchange for a pawn. It's interesting. It's not over. I mean, it's interesting, but yeah, Fischer doesn't particularly want to lose the exchange, it seems anyway. So if he takes with the knight, he'll lose a center pawn, and that is even actually worse than losing the exchange there for a pawn. In many respects, this center pawn, this construction is very comfortable for black. In fact, very solid. So yeah, that would totally justify black's play. In fact, a4 is coming soon, and black will have a great position. No, you don't want to do that either. No, the key move here is to play what Fischer played, e5, in response to this. So the game has certainly sharpened up now significantly. So we see now, okay, what are the options for black? Well, Spassky resolves the central configuration. In doing so, you might think, isn't he like liberating this rook if he takes here? He did actually take here. Let's just examine this. He took it, but what were the choices? Because after f takes, it seems, you know, that might be a bit scary to some to open up the rook. But if he didn't do that, let's have a quick look at this position. If knight d5, yeah, actually, this looks as though knight takes b5 now. Now that there's no pressure on e4, is a safe pawn to take here. For example, like this, it seems it's a safe pawn up without black having the center pawn. So that just seems a safe pawn up. So there aren't too many choices here actually. Knight g4 again, probably would just take on b5. yeah, so d takes e5 is the idea for black. So we have f takes e5, and now knight d7. Okay, let's look at this position. Knight d7. What is going on here? Again, if queen takes b5, bishop a6 is probably under better circumstances to win the exchange than before. That skewer, so that's to be avoided. Black, if given another move, would be threatening knight c5. That's a juicy move to play here. The bishop's a very fine bishop on that diagonal. Playing knight c5, trying to get the bishop pair, is a nice motive here if white has to take and give black the pair of bishops. Well, in fact, this is actually the idea for the pawn sacrifice. It seems the main idea Spassky has is a very aggressive attacking player, and aggressive attacking players like the bishop pair. So this interesting pawn sacrifice, which was probably brewed up by the Russian team, like with probably Geller behind the scenes, who had a good track record against Fischer. Geller, as one of Spassky's seconds, probably brewed this up. It's a pawn sacrifice which seems not only emphasises the trump cards of the position, but they also kind of match, Spassky's aggressive attacking style. So he's giving up a pawn, and he's actually going to grab the bishop pair. And there have been many Spassky games where he's carved people up with the bishop pair. So can white avoid, one question, can white avoid giving up the bishop pair if he doesn't want to play bishop takes c5? What would actually happen here? Well, he could be losing his light square bishop anyway. So it's not just about black having the bishop pair here, it's about removing white's bishop pair. So say queen e3, knight takes, removing white's bishop pair, and this position looks like some fun to be had for black. For example, queen d5, now threatening mate. It looks as though white's on the defensive actually, and the knight is not so happy on b5, so there's definite compensation there for the pawn. It's much easier to play for black, and it seems like a nice attacking position. So okay, so let's see knight c5. After this, actually Fischer seemed to prefer his light square bishop to so he actually gave up his dark square bishop with bishop takes c5. So he's giving Spassky the bishop pair, keeping his light square bishop. His white weakens on the dark squares after this. In fact, now immediate aggressive moves here. So black is hardly in a passive position here. With queen g5, it seems black's in the attacking driving seat, at least for a moment, threatening mate in 1. So how to handle this? And also, what about this knight? Has it got a post on d6 later? Well, first things first, have to deal with this mate in 1 threat. So the queen retreated and keeps an eye on the e5 pawn as well. So everything seems sort of okay at the moment. We have rook ad8, threatening immediately actually rook d2, which would also just immediately terminate the game. This pressure, this focus on g2 would immediately terminate the game after rook d2. So that needs to be parried. So white is on a thin path here of accurate defense for a moment. He plays actually what seems to be an entirely logical defensive move, rook ad1. And okay, what does black want to do here? Well, black is not going to be able to double rooks or anything here, it seems. He actually just took on d1 in this position. So just getting rid of a pair of rooks. Why would black want to do that? Well, let's see. Rook takes d1. The queen can't take the mate. In fact, rook takes d1. And now we see black still insistent on coordinating some extra pressure, some extra firepower on g2, and does so with the move h5. So if black's given more time, simply h4, h3 to put g2 under pressure. This is the real pressure point. So stylistically, yeah, it seems like a fun attacking game. There's also an open invitation which I think is harmless for this rook to do anything. The queen is staring down at the back row here, so something like rook d7 this is actually losing immediately. Funny enough, this is an instructive tactic. Let's see, this wasn't played rook d7, so this is a nice time to see who's awake. Knight d6 was played in the game, but if you play rook d7, can you see what black can do here if I give you 20 seconds starting from now? Anyone? So black's plan win here. It's actually, shall I give you a clue here about it? It's actually a very forced mate in 4. So put your puzzle caps on. This is a mate in 4 for mating white in 4 moves here. Okay. No, not bishop c6, Sergey there. No, much stronger than bishop c6. And I want Sergey and everyone else to be able to see these forcing moves in your own games. If you're going to play over the board chess, these are very, very important to examine. Forcing moves at all times, even the more outrageous ones, because sometimes in a particular configuration they can be absolutely winning. A forcing move can lead to a full sequence of events where you just transition your game position into a win and the opponent resigns. So you've got to examine all the forcing move sequences, no matter how outrageous. So I'm hoping you would consider even crazy ones like taking on g2, and in fact both of these seem dangerous. Queen takes g2 is not seemingly well, no, it doesn't actually do anything. It just gives up the queen because there's no rook to mate or anything. No, the way to do it here is actually bishop takes g2. But as a discipline in your thinking, you should examine all the forcing moves, even crazy ones, because there's going to be a time later in the game it might actually work. But here, the crazy one is actually, which does work in this position, is bishop takes g2. And then we have this other forcing move, queen c1 check, and the queen and bishop are actually mating on g1 here. Yeah, well, white could delay with rook d1, but you see the point. So rook d7 just immediately would lose in this position. So it wasn't played actually. White wants to keep his back row secure, and yes, it just highlights the queen is not just hitting g2, it's got access to the back row. White actually played knight d6 here, so white is threatening that bishop on b7. Okay, so now we see bishop a8, bishop retreating for a moment, and black still seems to have an idea, the principal idea of h4 to create some real fear and terror in white's camp with h3. If a pawn lands on h3, it looks very, very promising. So how does Fischer handle this? Is this going to be an excellent example of defense? Okay, what he does first in this position is actually bishop c4. The bishop on b3 is not doing anything particularly significant, but on c4 it can actually go to d3 and then maybe neutralize this diagonal. So this modest move already provide some defensive resource against h4 h3. Well, actually Spassky did try now the move h4. This I don't know if this is entirely technically best here, h4 immediately, but I don't think there's any time for bishop d3 here, as I mentioned. Let's have a look at this position, because h3 is actually maybe even more significant than just parrying the bishop. Let's have a quick look. Fischer's defensive move here is actually to play h3, which carries a significant downside potentially, that h3 does actually weaken these dark squares. When you play h3, you're weakening the dark squares. Could he have avoided what I mentioned just now, which is bishop d3? Let's have a quick look at this. h3, and if we try and defend with bishop e4, actually this just fails in this position. There's a slight problem with this whole thing here, which I hope everyone can see in this position. A slight weakness of the last move. Bishop e4 would be a terrible mistake, because the e5 pawn is not protected, and in fact taking e5 works in this position. But I just want to test everyone why it would work. That's quite amusing as well. So first of all, okay, I've got a couple of questions just to see who's tactically awake. Would you take on e5? And why would you take on e5? So, would you take on e5? And why? Because, you know, I could say, oh, okay, it's a great move, but why? Why? In this position, why does bishop e4? Why can black play queen takes e5? The tactically alert, I think, will understand the concern with taking on e5. Okay, what is the concern with taking on e5? Yes. Okay, if you understand the concern for taking on e5, then look at the tail end of that. There's a surprising shock to it. Actually, I didn't engine check it. I'm hoping there's a surprising shock to it. Let's have a look. I hope you're all with me on this. Okay, remember I said this bishop and pawn is dangerous. Yeah. In fact, these bishops are pretty scary. They're working together very well on these diagonals. Yeah. So when you do a forcing move calculation in this sort of position, just remember this is in the climate of these two bishops pointing at the king. So with that in mind, even if you think you're winning someone's queen, just remember this is in the climate of the bishop pair staring at your king here. So, okay, the concern, Sergey, yes, is bishop h7 check. Let's have a quick look. So the concern is bishop h7 check to win the queen. Black simply takes. Queen takes. And then there's two mates. There's hg, checkmate. Ouch. It's checkmate. Or bishop takes g2, checkmate. So, when you hear people say when you do A, follow up with B, not necessarily. This does have potential maneuver bishop d3 to e4, but after h4 you can't carry on with this plan. Cannot, because queen takes e5 just refutes it. So yes, a compromise needs to be made here on the dark squares. What to do about this h3? The king can't come out. It's actually stranded here virtually because of that powerful dark square bishop. So white's forced to do this compromising move, it seems, of h3. The engine suggestion is actually to block the diagonal here, not touching the pawn, and engines are often very good at that. These suggestions which don't create any structural weaknesses and often involving piece play, and there does exist the possibility of just using pieces to defend things with knight e4, it seems. Hitting the queen immediately. Queen takes, knight takes, but black technically might be slightly better here. And now with h3, without the dark square bishop, this is the key point. If you play this without black having the dark square bishop, then this is a slightly less compromising situation perhaps. So that was actually the engine choice, knight e4. Get rid of black's dark square bishop first. sacrifice the e-pawn. But Fischer's choice leaves this potentially dangerous dark square bishop. So you might think, well, how can black actually get onto these dark squares? So he's forced a slight concession. Well, okay, this is interesting. You might think, well, what about this sort of battery? You get a bishop and queen battery here, won't that do the job? Yeah, the bishops are zigzagging on both sides here. First we have this bishop wanting to do this, and now we've got this bishop wanting to do this. So we have now actually a move from Spassky which is pretty crude, yeah. Bishop e3, just put bishop f4 next, or queen g3 first, might be more accurate this way. With queen g3 first, black actually threatens queen takes h3 because of the pinned pawn on g2. So that might be the best way to actually construct the battery, with queen g3 first, then the bishop f4, and then just head for this sensitive h2 square. So this is a dangerous position after bishop e3, and it requires very, very careful defense. Now, Fischer's choice, yes, he is prepared to give up the e5 pawn. The e5 pawn is also being blocked here in any case, but I don't think it might be immune. Fischer's choice is to challenge the white queen before this battery happens. Queen g4. Okay, now a point about queen g4. It is prepared for queen takes an h3, and let's have a look at. Fischer must have calculated this, as well as queen takes e5. In the game, queen takes e5 was played, but let's have a look at queen takes g4 here. Does it do anything? Can we not play something like h3 in this position? Or is it harmless? It's mostly harmless, as an elite status would go if you played the game elite. I think mostly harmless. Bishop f1. And then with king h2 happening, it shouldn't be such a problem for black. Maybe soon. Okay, so for white. So actually, Spassky probably chose one of the better moves here, and this is the engine's top choice. Just forget taking the queen here. Keep the queens on, and that's another. Usually, it's another attacking player's kind of method to try and keep tension on. You know, keep the queens on, keep some attacking pressure sometimes. So instead of kind of cashing out, there's this balance. Where do you cash out? Where do you keep the attacking pressure? Well, black wants to keep the queens on. He actually plays queen takes e5, knocking out the centre pawn, but offering his h pawn. Does Fischer want to take the h pawn or do something else? Well, here also you might think, hang on, putting pressure on d6, isn't this dangerous as well? This pin, this is going to be a loose piece of queen takes h4, so it needs to be like correctly calculated. There's actually queen takes h4 possible here without losing material. And another concern, of course, is if this h file can be used later by black. You know, something like moving the king and this, but that's a long way away. It takes several moves to do that, so that's not an immediate concern. Fischer calculates queen takes h4 should be possible. He does actually play queen takes h4, so we have to examine actually. Well, it's actually stopping rook d8. There's no problem with rook d8. He's eyeing against rook d8, so there's no pin problem here. Is that the end of the story there though? Hasn't black got a forcing move, and then this pin could be dangerous? Yes, there are various forcing moves for black available here. Well, there's a couple of main ones to hit the queen to take it away from d8, either bishop g5 or g5. g5 looks a lot more radical. It does mean that the king might be free to come to g7, and this sort of plan is accelerated with pressure down the h file. It was actually Spassky's choice to play g5. Interestingly, you know, the engine's choice is actually bishop g5. Let's have a quick look at this as well. Bishop g5, how dangerous is this? Should it be dangerous? Black has the bishop here. Let's give an example. Queen d4 takes bishop f6. Can white actually survive this? It looks pretty good for black, and may technically have been the way to go here actually. With the bishop here, maybe might have been an interesting way to go. It would be quite dangerous for white. But in fact, we do see this other forcing move alternative, g5. I mean, from black's perspective, in some ways, surely he's licking his lips. He's got the bishop pair. He's knocked out a centre pawn for white. He's even got this pin potential to exploit rook d8 coming up. Is there a major problem here? Well, white makes this piece protected. So he increases the security of his position by protecting that rook. So in advance of anything like rook d8. Does it provoke anything else from black here? Is this queen able to be attacked? If he had gone, let's have a quick look in this position. If the queen had gone to well, where can the queen go? In fact, where can the queen go? I think it's restricted choices here, because otherwise this could be quite painful. If it goes back here, maybe that might be plausible, but I think this might be a mistake. This is queen g3. Actually, that's kind of really dangerous. Yeah. So okay, so the queen goes to g4, keeping guard of g3 and protecting the rook. Now we see a very interesting position where, in fact, the slow pan that I mentioned, you know, about king g7, that's an interesting attacking move in this position, to play king g7 and maybe play rook h8. It wasn't chosen here, but it is actually one of the, I think one of the top engine choices is king g7. Spassky actually chose bishop c5 here, which is quite tempting as well. It's gaining a tempo off that knight. Let's have a quick look. Did Spassky actually have a close to a big advantage here with a move like king g7? I don't know what you guys think of this position, but if you look at that bishop and this h-file potential, wouldn't you say objectively that king g7 is very promising? Wouldn't you prefer black here? Do you prefer black here? I mean, that's my question. If we just pause for a moment here, because Spassky's played a lot of really aggressive, you know, games. I wonder if, you know, the tension of the match is getting to him. I mean, because it seems as though, you know, king g7 is really quite lucrative in many respects. I don't know if you know, to you, but for me, king g7 is quite tasty to get a rook on that h-file as soon as possible. In fact, you know, let's investigate it. So in the game, as I say, bishop c5 was played. But yeah, let's investigate king g7 here as an attacking choice. So black's, you know, potentially got either rook d8 on the cards or rook h8. Let's say white does nothing. Let's see the full power of this. Like rook h8. And then f5 to follow. It's going to be crushing, yes. So what is okay? Let's not give a ridiculous move for white. After king g7, what would be an accurate defensive move? Okay, maybe pinning the bishop. Now here, with this pin, actually, there's some tactical resources available. It seems bishop takes e6 is possible. So if queen takes, we take the queen and take the bishop. And here, yeah, knight c4, and white could actually be potentially even okay or better. So yeah, okay, there's maybe Spassky's worried about something like this kind of pin, and he wanted to get out of the pin here. Maybe that is a concern, trying to exploit the pin like this. So rook e1, it gets complicated. Rook e1. Say rook here. Knight here. So trying to get another pin and win the bishop on e3. Actually, this could start to look really quite good for black. Bishop f4. And for some reason, the evaluation's gone to about -6 for black. So why? Well, yeah, this is a pretty nasty pin. No, we can't do this. Rook d8. So the only move in this position would be knight takes f7, it seems. Queen takes, and head for this ending. Which doesn't look too good. Mind you, black's only got 2 pawns, but you know, potentially this looks like you know, black has more of the practical chances with the piece. If white was really forced into this sort of ending, I don't know, that looks black's got the chances there. So I do believe actually this would require extremely careful defense in this position. This king g7, it's not only keeping the idea of rook h8 but rook d8 if white's not careful. So maybe Spassky had been worried about this, but rook d8, switching to rook d8 as a clever trick. It seems you know, black's got a very interesting position here, full of resources. Okay, so a very critical moment. So bishop c5 was played instead, and the knight moves back to b5, and now in fact king g7 is played here. Is there a slight difference of the position? Isn't it just an improvement that in fact black has just avoided the possibility of the bishop being pinned? Well, the knight's also kind of slightly improved now and comes back to d4 now. That's the slight snag. Knight d4 is now possible. And you might think, well, surely either rook h8 or rook d8 is still quite interesting. Is that the case? Is rook d8 actually possible here? Maybe just c3 now, and white's actually stable. He's stabilized. So that's not so effective now. Rook h8 was played, and with the idea that rook h4 to kick the queen is going to be really dangerous for rook takes h3. This pawn is pinned. So isn't rook h4 very dangerous here? The knight is a hero. It comes back to protect h4 and with tempo hitting the queen. So it seems, is it really possible that one slight technical inaccuracy, bishop c5 instead of the immediate king g7, is letting Fischer slip away here? This pawn is a liability. If the queen moves, maybe queen takes g5 is possible, protecting h3. Let's have a quick look at this. In the game, bishop takes f3, giving up the bishop pair. Black doesn't, you know, ideally would have wanted to have kept this attacking bishop, which was pinning g2. So, you know, let's have a quick look. Say something like queen f4. I think white survives by the skin of his teeth with queen takes g5, takes, and the knight is protecting h3 against rook takes h3 here. What does black do here? Black tries to dislodge the knight. This is interesting now. Knight take. This can get complicated. This position again. We have another complicated ending where most of black's pawns are stripped away for a piece, but it might be okay for white. So okay, queen f4 wasn't played. It might be one of the stronger moves in the position, but Spassky decided to get rid of his light square bishop here. Quite committal. Bishop takes f3. So that was played instead. So it seems now we have opposite coloured bishops, and maybe, you know, white seems to be coming out of the woods here after queen takes f3. After all that, queen takes f3. I don't think there's time for black to do pawn grabbing here, by the way. I would imagine this is severely punished. In the game we see bishop d6 looking at h2, but if queen takes b2, this would be better or not for white. Rook f1. It's pretty scary. It should be okay for white, opposite colored bishops. So yeah, Spassky went in for bishop d6, but there's a key defensive move here which was played, and the prospects of at least drawing the game are increasing now after this next move. So can you see what white plays in this position to defend h2? So white's play. So how would you defend h2 here? Testing your tactics if you haven't seen this game before. Sorry, there's a question from Sergey. I'll get to you, Sergey, in a moment. So you say, why not play f5 instead of king g7? Okay, we'll rewind that in a moment. But, okay, for this, just here, how does white defend h2? A couple of you saying king g1. Oh, there's 3 of you on YouTube stream saying king g1. Interesting. Or rook takes d6. Oh dear, guys. I think if you were playing a super GM, you'd all lose, I think, from this position of king g1. So I'm glad I asked it. It's a good defensive question. King g1 basically loses. Fischer's move is the only move to stay on the board here, it seems. One of the only moves, queen c3. Rook takes d6 might be a second trying to stay on the board. Not as convincing. But with king g1, queen h2. And now, wherever the king moves, can you see what black does? I'll give you king f1. Black's play has a crushing move in this position, which shows that careful defense was needed, even if it meant doubling pawns. By the way, Botvinnik seemed to be a fan of doubling pawns for strategic motives quite a lot of the time, which added, for me, great interest to his games. Yeah. So Fischer's move, queen c3, was chosen, but what would black do in this position, which is really quite crushing? So black to play here and win. There's a really crushing move in this position. Well, there's 2, but one is actually more crushing than the other. Black to play here. And this is one of the reasons why it wouldn't have been a good idea to have this position. Alright, yeah. Okay. Yes, there's some tempting attacking moves here. I mean, bishop c5 looks tempting, but actually bishop takes e6 is good for white here as a refute set, because then white might get an attack like this. It's like forced mate. So yeah, bishop takes e6, it kind of looks like a refutation. If check here now, there's not enough time for black. It's hitting the queen. No, the move here is not bishop c5. Either rook h6, but even more powerful is rook h4, it seems. Rook h4, threatening rook f4. So there's no time to take the bishop, because rook f4 is pretty good. Or even stronger, it seems, in this position. Rook takes c4. With dual threats of queen takes d6 and here. Okay, so rook takes c4 might actually be the strongest with those dual threats. So that's pretty crushing. Rook h4. If king e2, rook takes c4. So it's like a double attack of rook f4 to skewer the queen. It's also hitting the bishop. If bishop takes e6 here, this is just rook f4, just skewering the queen. So yeah, this position requires Fischer to play queen c3 virtually. as one of the main defensive moves, which pins down the queen. So taking that opportunity that the king's on g7. Now with white threatening rook takes d6, of course, because that queen is pinned. So the queens are coming off finally. So he got rid of Spassky's bishop here, and now he's getting rid of the queens. He's doing a defensive job by the script of that. So he's going into more of an end game now after queen c3. How bad is the end game? Let's see. Queen takes. But before, there was a question by Sergey on Play Chess asked before we go into this end game. I think Sergey on Play Chess earlier said, why not play f5 instead of king g7? Let's just step back for a moment to that king g7 moment. f5 was tempting as a forcing move, right? White has a very good move here. f5, weakness of the last move, it leaves g6. What does white play here to exploit this? Well, queen h, I think I'll just say queen h5 might be very good here. So to go into that g6 square. Is black's play too slow here? What is black actually threatening? If queen here, this is a mate in 4 actually. It crumbles for black. That would be embarrassing. Yeah, so the problem, it seems, Sergey, with f5, good question, is queen h5. That seems to be the technical problem there. And if queen f6, rook e1, and things are going really bad for black. f4, there's two strong moves here, bishop d3, or even stronger, knight e8, and things are just falling apart. Okay, so f5 wasn't really possible. Okay, so let's go back. So that question answered, I think, a little bit anyway. So we have this, the queen's coming off here, bishop e5, so it's opposite coloured bishops now, but the c3 pawn seems to be going, counter-attacking on this pawn with bishop takes e6 threatened. The king defends e6, and now we see Fischer letting go of c3. He's got no choice, he's letting go of c3, and we're down to 4 pawns each. 4 pawns each. Bishop e2, bishop e5, king f1, rook c8. A bit of coordination here, bishop h5. Basically getting the rooks off now. Black has to defend f7 somehow. Plays rook c7, so the rooks are coming off, and the drawing chances seem to have gone up massively now. a4, away from the colour of the opponent's bishop, that's always good. So these pawns are becoming immune to that. It's only the king walk which might be a concern, to pick up these 2 pawns on knight squares. We have king e7, so this king walk's a slight concern maybe. King e2, f5, king d3, bishop e5, c4, king d6, as though it's the last sort of concern. The king's held back with bishop f7. It's not going anywhere for a moment. Bishop g3, and in fact now c5 check is played, and they agreed a draw on move 45. It wasn't a quiet draw, it had some violence behind the scenes. Let's have a look at this final position. If king d5, well, the king's kind of stuck to that pawn here with that pin. So a king move, what is black actually doing here? This pawn's on the light square, these pawns are on light squares. It's difficult for black to make progress. If the king goes back here, that looks no problem. Something like this. Say black wants to try and move these pawns, then king coming here. This is, you know, maybe quite dangerous. So I don't think black wants to do this particularly. Or the king coming here. It seems okay for white, for sure. So yeah, on move 45, that draw agreed after c5 check. Yeah, it seemed as though the game had a few interesting points. From an opening theoretical perspective, it seems a3 that Fischer played has been superseded in popularity with an immediate e5. The pawn sacrifice by black did seem to give black significant pressure, more than perhaps the pawn was worth. So a great pawn sacrifice from Spassky earlier on in the game. You know, getting the bishop pair, getting attacking prospects. Maybe if it had been played to the best technical accuracy, you know, with king g7 it seems instead of bishop c5, black, you know, could have reached a potentially winning endgame in some of those variations. So it was a very accurately played defense by Fischer to actually make sure he wasn't getting mated. He got rid of the bishop pair, then he managed to exchange queens, and then the endgame, again, careful to make sure nothing was going on in particular, coordinated to get the rooks off then. So only this bishop, opposite colour bishop ending, safe territory, and then a draw. So I think quite an exciting draw. I don't know what you guys think about this. I thought it was quite an exciting draw for game 4 in the Sicilian defence. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that a bit. I got something out of it. So we'll carry on next week on this match, epic match. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much. Thanks. See you next week.